Welcome back. A slightly different format to this particular episode of Wicked Leadership. And I want to talk just a little bit about a subject that came up in conversation with an old friend today. When he asked me, and it's not the first time that Mario's asked me this, whether or not climate change is true. What I'm just going to talk about over the next 10 or 12 minutes is two particular things. The science of climate change and global warming. And then I'm going to look at the flip side, climate change and global warming's impact on business. And my own background in climate change is that I actually originally trained as a climatologist at university. My honours degree looked at the microclimate of a glacier, of all things, in Iceland. I think before turning to the science, I need to deal with sort of an elephant that's on the side of a room with this, and that is a frequent criticism I hear of climate skeptics, and everybody's entitled to their opinion, is that it's all a huge conspiracy between scientists, that scientists are all collaborating together to look after themselves and ensure that they keep their funding running, and isn't it a big con? The answer is anybody who thinks that has clearly never worked with scientists, which I have over the years. In fact, I am a scientist. And the thought of getting my dear colleagues, and many of them are dear colleagues, to actually conspire over everything is almost laughable. The thought that so many thousands of climate scientists could come together and conspire to put a hoax on the entire world population is frankly laughable, and I actually won't have a bar of it. Now, I'm quite happy to see informed debate against climate change, but I've been looking at this issue I suppose I first started to look at it when I was at high school, which is now 40 odd years ago, really, probably a little bit longer. I looked at it in detail at university and have kept, excuse the expression, a weather eye on it ever since. And it's quite clear that the data, and it is data, it is not facts, it's data. The data is telling us that the climate is changing and we've got global warming. So let's have a little look at what that actually means. Earth's climate has changed across history. In the last 650,000 years alone, there have been 7 cycles of glacial advance and retreat. Most of these changes are attributable to tiny variations in the Earth's orbit, changing the amount of solar energy the Earth receives. The last ice age ended abruptly about 11,000, 12,000 years ago, and this marked the beginning of modern climate era and human civilization. Now, the current warming trends is particularly significant. It's highly likely, and the probability is greater than 95%. It's highly likely that most of the change is the result of human activity since the mid-20th century. And it's proceeding at an historically unprecedented rate. All of the technology we've got out there, particularly Earth orbiting satellites, enables scientists to see the big picture, the global picture. And we've got all sorts of different types of information about the planet and its climate. They've been collected over decades, and the body of data reveals consistently clear signals of climate change. There are no statistical tricks. The models are complex. Yes, there are some faults in them, but there are not major faults in them. Mid-19th century science established the heat-trapping nature of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. Their ability to affect the transfer of infrared energy through the atmosphere means that there is no question, do you hear that? No question, that increased levels of greenhouse gases must cause Earth to warm in response. This is supported by other data. Ice cores from Greenland, Antarctica, and tropical mountain glaciers show that the Earth's climate responds to changes in greenhouse gas levels. There's other evidence as well. There's evidence of climate change in tree rings, ocean sediments, coral reefs, layers of sedimentary rocks, what we call paleoclimatic evidence, ancient climate evidence that shows that current warming occurs roughly 10 times faster than the average rate of ice age recovery warming. So, carbon dioxide from human activity has increased more than 250 times faster than from natural sources after the last ice age. What this presents to even the least trained eye, somebody who's well informed, is that the evidence for rapid climate change is compelling. Since the late 19th century, the planet's average surface temperature has risen about 1.18 degrees C. This change is driven by primarily increased carbon dioxide emissions into the atmosphere and other human activities. And most of the warming has occurred over the last 4 decades, with the most recent years being the warmest. I haven't got data around, but 2016 and 2020 were tied for the warmest year on record. It's going to be interesting to see what 2022 and 2023 tell us. Now, the ocean has absorbed most of the increased heat, and the top 100 metres of the ocean show warming of more than 0.3 of a degree since 1969. Now remember, Earth stores 90% of the extra energy in the ocean. The Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets are decreasing in mass. Evidence shows that Greenland has lost about 250 billion tonnes of ice per year between 1993 and 2019. Antarctica lost about 134 billion tonnes of ice per year. Glaciers are retreating worldwide, including the Alps, Himalayas, Andes, Rockies, Alaska, and Africa. And I lived in New Zealand for 10 years, and I can tell you, I actually watched that happen. I've been to the glaciers at Mount Cook on several occasions of those years, and they are visibly shrinking. And satellite observations show that the spring snow cover in the Northern Hemisphere has decreased over the past 5 decades. The snow is melting earlier. The extent and thickness of Arctic sea ice has declined rapidly over the last several decades. Global sea level rose about 200 millimetres in the last century, but the rate in the last 2 decades is nearly double of that of the last century and accelerating every year. Since 1950, the number of record high temperature events in the United States has increased, and the number of record low temperature events has decreased. We've also seen in the US increasing numbers of extreme rainfall events, and I can tell you, having lived in Australia for 10 years, we are seeing a change in local weather conditions that are no doubt caused by climate change. Here's something else that's worrying. Since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the acidity of surface ocean waters has increased by about 30%. This increase results from humans emitting more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and its absorption into the ocean. The ocean has absorbed between 20% and 30% of total anthropogenic carbon dioxide emissions in recent decades. No ideological argument or dogma, nothing political, economic, or religious overcomes the data. It is substantial, it is coherent, it supports each other. We have different scientists saying the same things. There's no great conspiracy. There's no great collaboration. This is just good, complex science telling us that we've got a problem, and that is that the Earth's climate is changing. The planet is warming, and a major cause, not the only cause, but a major cause is humankind's activity, specifically economic activity. So, the flip side, climate change and global warming's impact on business. Qualitative research on business responses to climate change identifies several impacts: regulatory change, physical change, product and technology innovation, operational efficiency, reputation, financial impacts, and changes in consumer needs. What the Global Climate Risk Index does is to capture country-level losses from extreme weather events. So, when we look at this, the likelihood of loss from major storms, flooding, heat waves, and other extreme weather events is associated with lower and more volatile earnings and cash flows. Consistent with policies that attempt to moderate extreme weather induced by climate change, firms in countries characterised by more severe weather are likely to hold on to more cash. Their intent seems to be to build financial slack and organisational resilience to climate change threats. Those firms also tend to have less short-term debt and more long-term debt, and are less likely to distribute cash dividends. Specific industries are less vulnerable to extreme weather and so face lessened climate change risk. Given the established and profound evidence of climate change and its risk to and impact on business, what should businesses do? Well, one of the things that we need to talk about is the idea that resilience is absolute key, and that is to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impact. And the World Business Council for Sustainable Development tells us that companies need to prepare for both the physical risks that are associated with climate change, as well as the associated transition risks on the path to an economy that is net zero greenhouse gas emissions. Businesses need to integrate their climate change risks into their enterprise risk management processes and factor climate action into their decision-making processes. So practically, what does this mean? It means that businesses must understand and assess business risks associated with climate change. They should put climate change resilience at the core of their business strategy. They should scale up investment in climate change mitigation efforts alongside efforts to adapt to climate change. They should communicate with stakeholders referring to actions on climate change and work with others to better support decision making in the context of climate change. And they should advocate for business climate resilience to build capability and capacity across and between business sectors. But to summarise really, my friend Mario asked me, is climate change real? The answer is yes, climate change is real. There is compelling and consistent evidence supported by very significant scientific effort by deeply serious scientists, places like NASA, in Australia, CSIRO, and other places across the world that tell us that this is happening, and the evidence is consistent. At a personal level, I've been watching it for 40 or more years, and the evidence is compelling. And I'm a relative layman, but I can read the science. It is compelling. The question is, what do we do about it? The question is that we have to respond, and we have to build resilience, and we have to understand that this is a substantial, wicked problem that we need to address. And I'll come back to it in the future. If you're interested in the sort of things that I talk about, take a look at the links below. And particularly in this context, what I've just been talking about, please take a look at the Wicked Scorecard to see how you're positioned in terms of your work-life environment.